Hello, welcome to an overview and mini review of every single expansion available on the KDM simulator, with the exception of the smaller ones which I've reviewed elsewhere. This will also be a purchasing priority guide. I'm covering just the first generation stuff, and what I define as first generation at this point is everything that came before the Gambler's Chest. The Gambler's Chest really added a huge section of new rules via philosophies through the Ark Survivor system and patterns. Patterns had appeared beforehand, but they're kind of part of a second generation of more complex rules. Because the Gambler's Chest isn't on the simulator at the moment, I will not be talking about it too much here, but I will briefly go into it and the Black Knight at the end. If you're wondering about the Frog Dog, I'm having trouble managing to pay for my shipping, not because I don't have the money, but because every time I try and pay for it, I get a failure on the payment attempt. I'm trying to resolve this through support. Hopefully by the time this video comes out, that should be sorted, but I thought I'd briefly mention that. The Frog Dog definitely won't be something I talk about here, but I will have a little bit of a discussion about the Gambler's Chest and the Black Knight, as I've had a fair amount of time to play with both of those now. So, what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be looking at each of the expansions, and I'm going to be talking about how good I think the showdown is, how enjoyable it is, and maybe highlighting a couple of key things. I'm going to talk about how good the settlement side is. I typically am going to cover that under gear, but by that I also mean any secret fighting arts that you may unlock, any other innovations, bits and pieces like that, how much it adds to the settlement side of things. And I'm also going to be talking about what kind of players I think this is good for, whether it's you're like a new player, or you're looking for an extra challenge or some variety, etc. I'm just sort of going to cover all of that, which will give you an idea of how much value is in the thing. But before we start with any of that, I'm going to do a baseline, and I'm going to do this process for all of the core game monsters. Because with the Gambler's Chest, we're now at a point where effectively every single core game monster is its own expansion, quote unquote, which you can kind of push back and forth and lock in whatever you want for the given setup you want for your campaign. There's a node system, so I'll be referring to that with the given monsters where they land in the nodes. Before we get started, just usual channel kind of stuff. If you really like these, please do consider supporting via Patreon membership at the 50 krona, $5, €5 tier. You get the videos a little bit more early, and help support me in making these. Kingdom Death is not a cheap game, and keeping up just with the shipping is quite a challenge. Also, you could join channel membership. If I get enough channel members, I'll be looking at maybe doing some sort of channel specific stuff. When the Gambler's Chest comes on, I'm probably going to start playing on the simulator and recording it. If I do that, it's almost certainly going to not go out to general public release, because it's really it's difficult for me to play the game on any digital form. I prefer the physical. So that's just the kind of thing if you like that. Also, I write about Kingdom Death or other boss battlers once a week. Occasionally I'll put up an extra article if I've played a board game I really enjoy. So you can catch that there. If you want to hear about me talk with a bunch of other gamers about board games in general, you can also listen to our podcast. It's called The Last Standee. You can catch it on SoundCloud or on any of the general podcast apps there. We sometimes talk about Kingdom Death and other boss battlers, as that's the common ground between all of us, but otherwise we may cover gaming related subjects. So yeah. Last of all, My dog kept us up last night. It's either like a mild headache and I'm not feeling too great. So if I get a little like vague or wishy-washy, please bear with me. I've just not had enough sleep. It's so bad. My partner's had to take the day off work because we're up all like night with it. The dog's okay. She's fine now. She's perfectly happy. We think it's probably her adjusting to her anti-tick medication. Gotland has a lot of ticks, and you have to do something about it with dogs because there are like tick issue diseases and things like that. Yeah, it's just we think an adjustment period where she just feels a bit woozy because of it. Anyway, so she's fine. She's fine, but I'm not feeling great. Anyway, shall we get into these? And I don't know how long we're going to take. I'm going to try to not be too verbose with talking about these, but we'll see. There's a lot. You can see there's a lot on this table. So let's get to it. Right. So if I just zoom in and come over here, we're going to start with the White Lion. So, the White Lion is the first monster that the vast majority of players are going to encounter. I'm part of a tiny minority who didn't. For a convoluted and weird reason, the Gorm was actually the first monster I ever fought. Yeah. But the White Lion is the intended learning process. And the Showdown, I think, does an incredibly good job at this. It's really very good at teaching. The White Lion is not a complicated monster to operate, but it isn't totally basic. It is still more complex than any boss you'll encounter in a typical dungeon crawl or things like that. However, its behaviour is like a house cat, which makes sense because big cats are big cats, So there's a very sensical kind of way that this behaves. Its attention can be drawn to what's in front of it, but it's not 100% predictable on that. It teaches you a bit about the AI. It teaches you that you can guide the monster by sort of providing a target for it, but it also lets you know that sometimes that's just not going to work and you'll have to pay attention elsewhere. Also, this is a great little starting showdown because it provides tall grass, which gives a little bit more of a buffer for players to survive a bit longer while also being thematic, and it just does a great job. On top of that, if we just zoom in on the cards a bit, we have like a lot of the moves the White Lion pulls are variations of Claw, which is also the basic action for the White Lion. It gives a lot of consistency and it helps you, as I said, learn about that kind of targeting thing and understanding it. But we do have neat things like this, like Grass, which is it goes for a knockdown survivor. This is a big teaching card, this one, because it is warning you that, hey, you might think you're safe when you're knocked down because you're not a threat. That's not true. And this is something that is here to kind of try and teach you that leaving survivors on the ground at the start of the monster's turn can and sometimes will be really punished, and that becomes very important when going through the first campaign that you play, because there is another monster that will absolutely brutalise you sometimes if you leave a survivor on the floor. So that's what I quite like about the way this is designed and signals what's going on. Additionally, when you step up to the level 2, hey, you get Cunning. Cunning's really cool because it teaches you, just a simple status can massively change the way the monster's behaving. And also, though, it puts this little flow step in here and gives you the opportunity to learn that you could dash to not suffer this effect. And that puts you towards this understanding of how important dash is as a defensive tool. And you may have figured out already, but if not, by the time you go up against the White Lion, level 2 White Lion, boom, it's right here to teach you, and hopefully you have that eureka moment, or somebody does, and you feel a bit clever, and you're like, oh, survival actions, they're not just for spamming attacking the monster, we can use them in other ways, which is really, really sweet. I will say that the level 3 White Lion is a bit kind of like pre-indomitable resources. It's just not a very interesting fight. That's one of the problems the White Lion has. Is like when you get to level 3 on it, the rewards are not very good with that indomitable, and what it's doing just isn't interesting enough. It's just doing the level 2 stuff, but a lot harder. It does, however, have the pretty cool like 0 presence sort of legendary card, which is kind of sweet. So it's not totally awful, but I do think it's one of the weakest Node 1 level 3 fights. No, it is the weakest Node 1 level 3 fight, in fact. But yeah. On the gear front, the White Lion has a bit of a mixed bag. When it comes to the gear, we have really good weapons. These 3 here, Lion Beast Guitar, King Spear and Catgut Bow, are phenomenal weapons. In fact, the only negative I kind of have about them is they're so good that you toss away Bonesmith weapons really quickly, which is, it's a bit of a shame. And speaking of Bonesmith weapons, I would like to also highlight how I appreciate the White Lion doesn't have any super dense locations. So if you're struggling and you're still stuck on frail weapons, this monster gives you a place to go and make them attacks and not worry about your weapons breaking. So that's a nice little buffer for players. It's a little like safety margin to help out. Cat Fang Knife, on the other hand, I don't understand how this got designed through design phases. Like, at no point do I think this should be coming from a Node 3 monster. I mean, if we just look very briefly, it's a 14 toughness monster. Okay, so I've got a 2 strength weapon here. I roll a 10 to wound, and I get to wound because of the automatic system, the auto wound system, but I've only rolled a total of 12. Any other result is a failure. And I can see what the concept was. You get +1 strength every time you do a perfect hit. This has got a little bit extra on there for the extra speed. Always a perfect hit weapon, but 3 speed, 10% chance of a perfect hit. Typically, you're not getting a perfect hit on your first attack, and as a consequence, you're just hitting the monster for no effect, which is a really bad thing to be doing in this game, because the hit location deck is how the monster scales against you. So if your weapon is hitting the monster and not wounding it, the monster is getting to scale against you and your group and not suffer any payment for it, no penalty for it. So that's a real shame. Now, as we'll get to later on with the GigglesLion, we'll see a much better version of this. But essentially, this is my highlight of when they first designed Kingdom Death. They weren't anywhere near as skilled and as talented as they are now. They don't get me wrong, they were very talented. Like, the original design has some incredibly good stuff. But understanding of the numbers of the game, that's taken a while for them to put together, and this is an example of it. It's an old design, it really needs to be replaced. It's why I think the level 3 fight just isn't worth bothering with. However, it's a big pile of red affinities. Anyway, let's not worry about bashing on that too much, because we now have the Cat Eye Circlet. This is a phenomenally good weapon. Phenomenally good item. It actually has a weakness synergy with the White Lion, in that if you're defeated by the White Lion, it'll steal it because it's jewelry, which is kind of cool. And it's the first place you have an other, which doesn't interact with saviors, so it's nice to see that keyword. It'd be like in the campaign, you draw a savior, and you have that moment of, I can't put this on my savior. But most of all, this provides the start of the understanding of an entire separate way of playing the game as a survivor, which is playing in support. And it provides control to the players and information. It lets them take the advantage that the monster has, which is hiding and concealing what they're doing because their deck's face down, and it pushes it all face up. Excuse my chair. So I think this is like a really, really good item. It is perfect. Every single Node 1 monster, in my opinion, should have some form of hit location or AI deck scouting built into it. I do wish the Cat Eye Circlet wasn't quite so strong. 3 cards is a lot of cards. 2 cards probably would have been fairer. But ultimately, You don't have to use this if it's been too good. And once you get experienced enough with fighting a monster, you have to use the circlet less and less. You'll use it for specific goals instead of slowing the showdown down by having one survivor constantly just checking the deck. So that's nice. It's kind of training wheels. It's a really good item, and as anything in this, if you think it's OP, you don't have to use it, which is great. Our last piece is to note that the White Lion's armor set is pretty mediocre. It's meant to be an offensive damage orientated set, and it can do that with daggers and katars. And when I get round to the damage dealing video that I'm going to do on archetypes, we're going to dive into playing those high speed builds, because they, damage, we're going to take the wheels off and we're going to go nuts with the damage. But ultimately, what you want when you're dealing damage is you want some good durability. You want some good support for your damage dealing, and this provides decent support for daggers and katars, which is nice. But it doesn't give really enough defenses, and its affinity layout is a mess. It's just really a poor affinity layout, and it could have been so much better. So I generally don't recommend building White Lion armor unless you really want to. If you want to play with daggers or katars, especially like daggers, this can support you in doing that, which is nice. So it has a place in the game. Ultimately, I think the White Lion is close to the perfect Node 1 monster. I'm going to give it like an A- overall. I think the Showdown does a really great job of teaching, and if you get to the point where you're thinking the White Lion is too easy for me now, great, it's done its job. It's taught you everything you need to know, and you can step up to the more dangerous, more complex Node 1 monsters. Fantastic. Next up we have the Screaming Antelope. So the Screaming Antelope is our first Node 2 monster. It's a prey monster. We don't get too many of those in Kingdom Death. Like, it's rare that we get to see a prey monster, but this one is that. It's really well expressed on that front. Thematically, just like the White Lion, this is a great little monster, and there's a nice bit of interaction between these two where when you're hunting the Screaming Antelope, sometimes your White Lions can be involved because they're also hunting it. Also, Spidicules hunts antelopes, hunts them to extinction and drives them away, but that's some nice world building. I'm talking about all of this great thematic stuff because when we get to the showdown, Screaming Antelope leaves a lot to be desired. So, for a starter, we have this inexplicable toughness on the level 3. If we look at the level 3 White Lion again, 14 toughness. I think 14 is a good number. 12 is a absolute head scratcher. And on top of that, we have a bunch of moves like Bite, for example, which are totally shut down by a dodge, or even worse than that, block 1. In addition to that, the monster has a ton of resources in the showdown. With like Acanthus being everywhere, that you can turn into dried Acanthus, or you can let the antelope chow down on it and heal. And why would you want to do that? Well, it turns out the Screaming Antelope is full of critical wound to get resource locations, and the only negative side of it is that it's quite a bony animal. It drops a lot of bones. They're probably the least valuable of the 3 types, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're like farming. Also, when we get to our level 2 trait, I actually think Diabolical is damage-wise really well done, because it is going to deal damage that can't be avoided because of how it handles its collisions. It's just a little confusing because this trample zone is purely for targeting, and when it actually runs at the survivor, it can like move up and down normally, like it just weave around to get through the survivor. But it's easy to get a little confused and think that it's just going to bull rush in a set direction and you can step to the side and it will miss. That's really not how it's going to work for anyone who is actually targeted. The other survivors can indeed step out of the way and not get run over, but the targeted survivor either outpaces the Screaming Antelope, which can be a little tricky. Screaming Antelope does have decent movement, or you get run over. So the showdown, I think, it's one of these showdowns where I've spent a lot of time looking at it and being like, how do you fix this? Because thematically, it's really well done. But when you get down to playing it, it needs more speed on many of its basic baseline attacks. It needs less resource drops. You've got to take into account all of that acanthus, which is worth value, and there's a vermin on the board, which is also worth value. Vermin sometimes a hide. And also, once you get the monster down to its instinct's like really harmless. I don't know how many of you have actually had this, but like one of the classic moments of a Screaming Antelope fight is when it's run out and it's down to its greys and there's no acanthus on the board. And so it runs to the edge of the board and then just goes round and round in a circle, panicking, like just around the edge of the board. That's the problem. This is a very unthreatening monster. When we get to the gear, there are also issues. For example, the Beast Knuckle, which is the only other Katar in the core game, is not better than the Lion Beast Katar. And Katars have this problem within the entire of the core game anyway, where you only have 2 Katars and you just stop playing with them. They're not really a viable type, a weapon type. There's the same problem with whips, but whips do become okay near the end of the game. And daggers have that kind of problem where also the progression's a bit skewy if you're just in the core game. Anyway, Beast Knuckle's not very good. I haven't even bothered pulling out the Lancer Longinus because by the time you can make it, you may as well just make a Lantern Glaive, which is honestly, on the whole, a better weapon because of that extra axe synergy. Although the Lancer Longinus isn't totally awful, it does have benefits and positives. It's just kind of slightly above average as opposed to being really good, and it's tough in this game. If you're slightly above average, yeah, you know. Otherwise, the items are the best stuff in Screaming Antelope's selection. I pulled a few of those out. Bone Earrings provides a super cool build that is starting to get better and better as we get more and more bone items. And this is another fun way of leveraging and playing high speed, which is like really sweet. I'm going to talk about the bone build stuff in damage in the damage dealers video when I get to it. We also have cool stuff like Brain Mint, which is an alternative way of not just clearing bleed but getting rid of a lot of other stuff, and a stand-up. Elder Earrings I like to highlight because it's hey look, there's a Lancer Longinus. Elder Earrings is quite good because nice affinities, and it can really help push a survivor up faster. This has gotten better as time has moved forward. The biggest thing though is blood paint. Blood paint is one of the most fun items in the entire game because it allows you to suddenly play a proper two-handed weapon style in a way that paired doesn't quite manage. Paired feels like you're just stabbing at once with both weapons, whereas blood paint feels more like you're actually swinging with them in, you know, alternating kind of tandem. It also provides a great sword and board strategy where you can activate the shield and then a one-handed weapon, the sword in quotes. As for who the Screaming Antelope's for, I think it's pretty reasonable at helping players who are struggling early on to learn what they're doing. Also, if you just want to farm a single monster in one showdown, you can set up for it, you can take the level 1 Screaming Antelope and you can empty the entire resource deck. And then you don't bother with the Screaming Antelope again for the rest of the game because you've gotten yourself a nice stash and you're good to move forward. The other kind of people like me, I love blood paint. I can't give up blood paint, so the Screaming Antelope sits in my campaigns so often just because I want to get blood paint. It's a little tricky. The bladder is a one-of in the resource deck, so it can be hard and it does result in having to fight the Screaming Antelope a number of times, but for me, blood paint is worth it. I love blood paint. On the whole though, I don't think this is the best of them, and I actually realised I forgot to talk about Screaming Armour, so we'll very briefly go into that. Screaming Armour has had more alterations to it than any other armour set in the entire game, and at the moment it's kind of not in a good place. It was too strong in 1.5, it was too weak before that, and now it's back to being too weak. it's got a similar problem to the White Lion armor in that it just doesn't have enough armor points for the play style it's asking you to undertake, which in this case is stabbing the monster with a spear. Spears are a little bit safer than many weapons, but actually katars are safer than spears because they have reaction cancelling built in at specialization. Spears just have that extra ability to deal with the trap. But it does have some good support abilities. It can give other survivors movement or insanity. It can help deal with terrain very well, and it has a lot of affinities on it, so it is not totally like ruined. It's just really could do with a few more armor points. Still, I use this armor set and I'm not upset about it, but I will often support it with some extra armor points via shields or other such pieces of gear, which is always tough because you've got a finite number of slots on your gear grid, 9 normally. You're spending 5 on your armor set. If you have to spend even more to support your armor set and make it viable for what you're trying to do, that can really hurt unless your armor set is doing something totally unique, which Screaming Armor isn't doing something totally unique. It's doing something moderately unique, but not irreplaceable. It's not like Rawhide Armor, which gives an ability that we just don't see anywhere. So that's Screaming Armor, that's the Screaming Antelope. I think the Screaming Antelope is the weakest of the quarry monsters in the core game. It's the one that's easiest to replace. I just can't give up blood paint. I loves my blood paint. Right, let's get on to the next one. So, the Phoenix. This is the big showcase monster that's in the core game. This is the big wow monster. It is quite large. It is really well sculpted, incredibly gross looking, and it's... I have mixed feelings about this monster. So, I actually think the showdown is amazing. It is incredibly enjoyable how the Phoenix buffets you around, how well it's expressed with its age and superiority and position as being very high up in the food chain. And I like, on the whole, the timey-wimey like mechanics. The trouble is, it has a few of them that are a little bit too far pushed. Deja Vu, which we have down here, is one of the this is one of a very short list of AI cards that I would not be upset if they disappeared entirely. The trouble with this is you can draw this on the first turn, and you can draw this on the first turn against the level 1 Phoenix, and you play long enough, this will happen. And you just have to roll to see who fails, like stops existing. And this number here, this is insane. Like a 40% chance of ceasing to exist is nuts. Now later on in the showdown, when you draw Deja Vu, it's not so bad because you should have gotten some age tokens on there. But that's a quite egregious thing. On top of that, Spiral Age itself, this is such a high increase in Hunt XP, and it's not even scaling based on monster level. It's just level 1's doing this as much as everything else. So this time aging and like erasure from time mechanic is a little bit too pushed. On top of that, you can just get erased from existence on the hunt if you were stupid enough to go out without enough hunt XP. And you're not really warned about that by the Phoenix's introductory event. It's essentially something that just gets you when you're inexperienced, and you learn to just never make that mistake again in the future. It's the same as the Harvester. It's just you have to play in a certain way because of it, due to how high the punishment is if you don't. But as I said, on the whole, Showdown's amazing, and I love things like this, like Pustule Cannons, which is doing this entirely new and different thing, which for the first time you encounter it, where it's hitting all the survivors. And also, rather cheekily, the Phoenix tends to punish survivors who, when you attack them, if you're not in these cardinal positions here, like the middles of each of these, but it has AI cards that will then hit you and hit everyone in those spots for that, which is really fun push and pull tension. So I think like 90% of the Phoenix Showdown is incredibly well done. On the armor front, Phoenix armor is pretty decent. It has a very good set bonus in charge. This can really help you overcome weak weapons and make up the difference. And this can be a massively high number based on how much more movement you give your survivor. But also, the individual abilities, they're pretty good. The helm's nice. The body piece is one of the best body pieces in the entire game, and the boots are really good as well. My main problem with the Phoenix armor is we're kind of sold that the Phoenix is an affinity monster, that it provides rainbow type affinity stuff, and the armor set just doesn't follow that. In fact, so many of the pieces are just lacking in affinities, and it makes the set really awkward to build around. You're kind of tied into always trying to get a right-facing green and a left-facing red as a part of your armor set, and that's a bit of a shame. It does get addressed somewhat in the Gambler's Chest. There's some indomitable pattern armor pieces that help shore up the problems in the Phoenix armor, so it's not in as bad a place as it could be. I just think it's just a little bit of a shame that it's not quite where it should. On the gear front, however, the Phoenix used to be struggling. It used to have pretty bad strength on its weapons, with a few exceptions. That got addressed in the Legendary Pack update, and now I have no criticisms when it comes to the weapons in here. I think a lot of the items are great as well. Sonic Tomahawk is like the flagship for an amazing weapon. This thing beforehand was not very good. Now, chef's kiss. This is a weapon I'd expect to get from killing a level 1 node 3 monster. And it's doing a lot of cool things. It's doing additional attack rolls. It's got the ability to get savage and paired. It's really sweet and exciting, and it's a good high-speed weapon, which is great. It's nice to be able to say that, yeah, you know what, I would actually use this paired. It's good solo, but I would consider it paired as well. The Rainbow Katana is a fun little, I'd call it meme weapon. Katanas don't have a particularly great mastery. You have to get it from the Sunstalker, and then you either can only get it in People of the Sun or by killing a level 3 Sunstalker. But the Rainbow Katana is at least still interesting in that it scales. Once you get the blood sheath for it, it becomes like a late game weapon. So I think it's fun. And definitely, personally, I don't care about katanas. I'm not really interested in Japanese weapons. I have a preference for European and Chinese weaponry. But for people who love katanas, this one's a good one. Owl's Ring I have in here because this, on the other hand, this is a bit of another piece of design that really should be tightened up a bit more. The previous version stopped you getting tokens at all. That needed to be changed because it was messing with a lot of things. No problem with that. This new one had to be emergency patched because it turns out if you just played it exactly as it is, you would craft this ring in your final showdown, and if you lost the final showdown, the ring would wind you back and you would get to go again and again and again. In other words, you would be like Doctor Strange against Dormammu, and the monster's trapped in here with you until you kill it. So I hope to see another version of this that does something a bit better than what we have here. Thematically though, it's really cool. Hollow Sword, this got upgraded. It's now a fairly solid, decent weapon, and it's a good dagger in the core game, which is nice. Great spear. This is a nice little spear between the King Spear and Lantern Glaives. Always great to have that. We got like a really good level 3 craftable item here in the Crest Crown. The Feather Mantle is a great example of good affinities can help a item with situation abilities be amazing. The Bloom Spear, fantastic for controlling AI passively and being useful for survivors who sit near without being overpowering. But again, good affinities, does a lot. There's the Blood Chief I mentioned. Bird Bread, this is one of the things you'll often see paired with Phoenix Armor because of that affinity, but it's actually a good little tanking gear that you can just activate to get somebody out of a really desperate situation by putting the priority target onto you. And I think the downside is really nicely done. Last of all, we have the arc bow and also the hollow point arrow. This is like where your bow journey ends in the core game. There's no better bow than this in the core game. Even when we're looking at all of the bows that have ever been made, this is still in the discussion for being one of the best. So when it comes to the Phoenix, I actually think on the whole this monster is better for more experienced players. I do think one of the other Node 3 monsters would have been just a better fit for the core game. However, when we get to talking about those, they're so good that I'm really glad they're expansions, because then they wouldn't have their campaigns if they're in the core game. So, trade-off. Just, I think this is a big step up in complexity, and the way it has demands on players that it doesn't signal particularly well can feel bad for newer players who are going in blind. But yeah, it's not a bad creature anymore. It's just got a couple of rough spots that you can smooth over. I mean, it's amazing how fun the game can be if you just sort of feed deja vu to your dog. Whoops. Anyway, I kid. Let's get on to the Nemesis monsters. Right, so first up we have the Butcher, our Node 1 Nemesis monster. Honestly, no notes. The Butcher is one of the best Nemesis monsters in the entire game. It's thematically incredible. It's one of these monsters, it turns up out of nowhere, and that actually just makes sense. Once you start fighting the Butcher and you see what this monster is all about, you're like, okay, I get why it's just turned up out of nowhere. This is all super thematic. It's a really well done showdown. It's a good little get good check to make sure you've been crafting gear in the right direction. It's a fantastic end boss for the first run you play of People of the Lantern, because as many players talk about, it tends to end the run the first time you encounter it. Not because it's overpowered though, but because it's just really well expressed. I think this is a fantastic showdown, full of thematics, and I really like so many of the additional bits and pieces it's doing. So first of all, it steps up the toughness. 9, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a big difference. It also has Berserker, so it's less predictable. It's immune to Rawhide headbands because of this, because effectively reordering them doesn't make too much of a difference if you're trying to control it. No, it's doing both those moves. Infectious Lunacy is a great way of giving thematics while also putting a clock on the survivors. They can't hang around. If this goes on for too long and they get too many frenzies, oh boy, they're just not going to kill the monster. And Fast Target's really sweet, because suddenly we see the monster doing something different with its AI deck in that it's refreshing it all the time. Just one of the all-time great showdowns. I very rarely want to play a campaign without the Butcher in it. It's that good. And the only thing that I would say about the Butcher that it's been exceeded in is the Killenium Butcher is probably better, which is still super impressive. That something's actually better than the original Butcher. But yeah, an all-time, just one of the best parts of the core game. On the settlement side, the Forsaken Mask gives you access to the Mask Maker location. The only downside of this is it's a bit unpredictable when you're going to get it. It's very unlikely to get it against the level 1. You sort of have to aim for the death blow, and even then the odds aren't 100% in your favour. It's kind of a little random. And the campaign feels very different. If you get the Mask Maker early, it's a huge difference to getting it very late. I really like the settlement side of this though. Once you've got it, I think all of the masks are interesting and have their different applications. Some of them very powerful. They're all irreplaceable, so if the survivor wearing them dies, you've got to remake them, and they're not cheap. And they also provide access to legendary versions of these 3 monsters. And I will just say, I really enjoy the legendary monsters of all 3 of these. What's been done with like the Screaming Antelope for legendary, that makes a huge difference. Incredibly enjoyable. Is it the Golden-Eyed God of 1,000 Years, I believe, I'm going from memory, of the Phoenix is just really so cool. And the Great Golden Cat is, it's an exciting fight. So the Butcher just adds a lot to the game, and I really appreciate everything that it does, and I think it's an all-timer. The model could be better, but that's the case with a lot of these old models. They are not holding up to the newer stuff, which is just praise for the newer stuff, because they're very good models for their time. Okay, our Node 2 monster, we have the Kingsmen. So on the thematic front, the Kingsmen are cursed survivors. They've had their structure converted and turned into this armor. They now pretty much follow the ethos of the Hand and the King in that they are silent. Everything about thematics is amazing. The showdown is flawed. It has some really good parts. So first of all, this toughness here, love it. Like, it's not kidding around. And it has a nice mechanic where you get to, if you attack it from behind, then it's a little easier to wound, but also it seeks to protect its back because it's aware that it's easier hitting its back. The Kingsman also has an inbuilt weakness to daggers, which isn't great in the core game because the daggers in the core game aren't particularly good for that front, but it is interesting. And King's Aura, I think, is a super sweet trait because it gives this like buffer against hit location control, but it isn't impossible to overcome it. In fact, you're allowed to overcome it yourself just by interacting with it. That's really nice. But there's some particularly egregious portions of the showdown. This trap is a great example. This is how you shouldn't be doing a trap card. Essentially, the first time you encounter this trap card and you're not aware of what's coming, you can get utterly shredded. Okay, traps should be scary, not got a problem with that. But this line here, any survivors with a shield may elect to protect themselves and ignore this trap. If you have a shield, this does nothing. So every time you face the Kingsman in the future, all the trap does is cancels the attack and does this and does nothing. It doesn't get to do this this damage. It just gets to put battle pressures back on top. That's not great design, and I do think this needs to be replaced. If it like forced the shield to get returned to the settlement storage, that'd be fine. Or maybe even, archive the shield. It is acid blood. I'd accept that. You're put in a difficult situation. You're like, do I lose this shield to protect the survivor, or do I just take the hit? And that's more interesting than as it stands right now. And then there's Silent Hymn. Silent Hymn is the single most boring trait I have ever encountered. Essentially, it slows all the survivors down until the point that they're just wandering around inside mechanical molasses because they get minus movement tokens. And sure, eventually they get to 0 and then the whole process resets. But it's just, it drags the show down to a crawl in a really unfun way, and I don't much care for that. Finally, we have the curse. I really like cursed survivors. I love characters who are doomed to like a limited lifespan. They have a finite amount of time left and they're aware of it and they're looking to make a difference before they pass. That's all really super cool. I got no problem with that. My problem is that the armor that they get from it is boring. You gradually lose parts of your body and get permanently fused bits of King's armor on you, and the Kingsman armor is just dull. It's just blank, dull, bone-based armor points, pure raw armor points. And it's a shame to have a character who is going through something that should be really thematic, and they should be getting weird, cool new abilities that make you, oh wow, what's going on? Instead, it's just okay, sure, whatever, and that's a shame. I shouldn't be feeling so disengaged with a curse. I should be excited. So ultimately, this is one of the weakest parts of the core game. This monster is one of the first ones I recommend you replace. Right, the others, they have negatives, but they have positives. I think the positives in the Kingsman are all in the thematics, and a couple of nice things like King's Aura and his dagger weakness, but on the whole this is nothing compared to the others, so it's a real shame. And speaking of shames, it's time to look at the hand. That's pretty harsh, and I am going to say right now, this entity, my favourite entity in the game. I love the hand. I adore the hand. Just really sweet character. It's a joy narratively that we have this showdown where something that's unbelievably powerful turns up and just toys with the survivors, and at no point could you possibly really hurt the hand. That's not what this is about. The hand is just testing, seeing what the settlement's like, and I always really enjoyed that. And with the hand's inclusion in the Gambler's Chest's campaign storyline, chef's kiss. Really amazing everything that's going on there. I love all of that stuff. But the thing is, the showdown is basically a one-trick pony. While it's got incredibly cool thematic cards like this, Take Your Best Shot, where the hand just like turns around and goes, come on then, do what you can. And but it's entirely toying with them. And Full Powered Flip, where it just goes, I'm going to hit you with one finger, and that can potentially kill the survivor if they fly off the edge of the board. Super cool. All of this is phenomenal, and I love this stat line. You get up to here and you go, ooh, 30 toughness on the level 3 version. That's an end game final nemesis. Yes it is. That's where the final nemesis goes, on their toughness. Brilliant. But the problem is, once you've played this showdown a couple of times, you'll get the trick, which is you just do what the hand says and you let him slap you around for a while, and eventually he slow claps you, and this is the good result here. Sure, there's a chance of dying, but the rest of this is all great. And that's a shame, because this is a showdown with the potential of being like, on one hand you can try and do your best and punch the hand and smack him around, and you could earn his respect because there is a respect card. But the respect card, the rewards for that are way worse than the applause card. So it's just become default that the hand is this extra long cutscene where he turns up and basically wastes everyone's time, and then the survivors get some bonuses, and that's a shame. It's not great for a board game because you spend all the time setting up and you go through the motions with this. However, there was a problem, which is that the hand's a Node 3 nemesis, and we've not had another Node 3 nemesis until now. Now we've got the Black Knight. The hand will still be involved narratively as a part of the Gambler's Chest, but for everyone else, we can run the Black Knight instead, and I'll look at the Black Knight near the end of this far too long video, because I think this is going to get close to 2 hours, looking at the time I'm at now. Well, the Black Knight's amazing. The Black Knight's just amazing. So enjoy the hand while you got him, and then retire him to being a part of People of the Dreamkeeper, and don't worry about the rest. Okay? That's it. Okay, so we have our campaign-specific Nemesis monsters. Briefly talk about People of the Lantern first. I think People of the Lantern, on the whole, is a really good introductory campaign. Now, there's one thing that I wish was different, and for those of you who never played it, when you had the original 1.31 first edition Kingdom Death, once you faced and beat the Watcher, there was no gold smoke like afterwards. You'd get this exhausted lantern horde that simply has you fight tougher and tougher monsters until you lose. It essentially goes, okay, great, well done, you've won the campaign, fantastic, you can start again, or you can boss rush it and see how well you can do. That's a really nice thematic point. It's a good length campaign at that point, because you could play about 20 Lantern Years and you're done. that was of course removed, and we now have the Gold Smoke Knight. And I'll talk about the Gold Smoke Knight. I've got a lot of positive things to say about the Gold Smoke Knight, but I wish more than anything else that what we had was a little unlock where you play your very first People of the Lantern campaign and you beat the Watcher and you get this game, end of game, and it goes, congratulations, you've won, you defeated, and blah blah blah, talking about how the settlement feels after the Watcher is gone. Then it says you've got the Exhausted Lantern Horde from the first edition, where it says now you can either start a new campaign or you can go on and see how long you survive against the darkness. And then if you choose to start a new campaign, go and open this packet, and this packet contains all the Gold Smoke Knight stuff. I would have liked that surprise, but we can't even do that. If you don't own the original Kickstarter version and the upgrade, you don't have that Exhausted Lantern Horde, and the written content isn't a official part of anything. That's just something I put together for teaching the game to other people. I can't do it on the simulator, sadly, because I don't have the old Exhausted Lantern Horde card on the simulator, so I can't do this the way I do with new players in full, which I think is really sweet, because I will play and we'll get to Lantern Year 20 and I'll be like, we're not going to wait, let's just go, we'll go against the Watcher. If you really like it, we can go again afterwards, and then I can pull the surprise on them and now there's this new extra boss at the end. However, that's just me like ruminating about how things could have been. If we get into the campaign itself, I think narratively it's really strong. I love how the Watcher is foreshadowed. I really like the interaction between the Hooded Stranger and the Twilight Sword and the Watcher, and the indication and story building you get of the antagonistic relationship between them. I do think the Hooded Knight, was it the Twilight Sword, once you complete it, your survivor leaves. Okay with that, but I think maybe they should stay until the Watcher is defeated and then leave. Might be more narratively satisfying, because it feels weird that you have this Hooded Stranger turns up and gives you a weapon that is designed to be a silver bullet against Watchers, and somebody gets really good at using it, and instead of using it for the job it's needed for and then going, my work here is done, instead they just leave early, and that feels a bit off. So that's kind of just another thing I'd like to see improve further. That said, let's briefly get into the monsters. First up, the Watcher. Okay, love this guy. It's really sweet how from the very beginning the Watcher is foreshadowed. It's tied into so much that is going on, and when it turns up it recontextualizes everything that's happened before, and you go, oh, screw this guy. Likewise, the fight is just really thematically amazing. You get this trait of audience where if somebody dies, then the next survivor steps forward to picks up the gear and gets involved afterwards. It makes it feel epic, like the end of the campaign, which is why I think it makes for a good capstone on your first campaign playthrough. And likewise, you get the other survivors coming in to help in the form of this retinue, which is like a block of 9 survivors who will assist you and give you extra strength. We also have really cool thematic things that express fully how much this is like it's like a jellyfish. It's a dream jellyfish, you know. And Inhale Exhale does a great job of sort of expressing both the jellyfish-like nature of this creature. Again, you can see why I say it's a jellyfish. Also, there's like actual references to jellyfish parts in its hit location deck. But yeah, I love everything that's going on about that side of things. I do think it has one too many silver bullets against it. You can wake it early, and trust me, if you wake it early, the toughness is significantly lower, and it makes a big difference. Every year you've stalled to letting the Watcher wake up is a big increase. You think, oh well, it's only like going from 20 to 21 to up to 25. 20 to 25, that's a big break point. 20 is significantly easier than even 21. So that's like something new players might not be aware of, and it can catch them a little unawares. However, getting the game over at the Watcher isn't the worst. The retinue and the Twilight Sword on top of everything else, though, that's where things get a bit overwhelming. The Watcher can feel very underwhelming if you just use all the silver bullets against it, and that's not necessarily a fault of the Watcher. It's just that's the way it goes, and as such, I think this is a really great core nemesis and a great capstone monster. I think that maybe stuff just could have been a little bit tighter on it, but I don't know how, so I'm kind of shrug, it is what it is. Then we have the Goldsmoke Knight. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the showdown first. This is amazing. This showdown is absolutely amazing. It is so cool. The Goldsmoke Knight has this wonderful thing where it hits everything in and around the area with it, and it does it with hits, so you can still use stuff that counters hits against it, and pushes survivors away. It has this frustration trait here where even if you manage to blank everything it's doing, it's still coming at you with a heck of an attack. And on top of that, you've got this sweet moment where if you happen to have a Thundermaul, which is Sad Robot's own weapon, you've got a smaller version of its own weapon. Technically this isn't a robot, I'm referring to Sad Robot's Solemn Simulacrum from Magic. Really, this dude is an elemental knight, the guardian of the place you're set in, but you'd never learn that, and that's where the negatives come in. The Goldsmoke Knight has virtually no lore within the People of the Lantern. There's a couple of hunt events that refer to what it's doing, but you really need to just have a eureka moment to even realise that's what it's about. As for everything I said about the Watcher over there and how great its foreshadowing is and the recontextualising of what's going on, that's not present in the core game. We had to learn separately via a second party who asked Adam as to what was actually going on here, and that is the one negative I have about the Goldsmoke Knight. It isn't well tied into the story, it feels bolted on afterwards. If you go around looking for extra information, it will make sense, and I will talk about all of that when I do the video on the Gold Knight Showdown, which I am going to do. I'm going to do a video about it because the showdown itself is amazing, and I'd like to recontextualize and fully explain what it's doing, direct from what Adam wrote. So I really I'm going to get back to that, but ultimately that's the one thing I feel is a failure for the Goldsmoke Knight, is it's not very well forecast. If we go and look at the Gambler's Chest, the God Hand turns up at the end of that, and it's baked in from very early on that the hand/God Hand is involved, and it makes that final fight way sweeter when you get there. So Goldsmoke Knight, amazing showdown, just needs better tying into the core game. And at the 1 hour mark, nearly, I'm going to have to take a short break, we've been through the core game. So to briefly summarise, I think the quarry monsters are mostly pretty good for learning on. The Phoenix is maybe a little bit too complex. When it comes to the Nemesis monsters, the Butcher is, masterclass. These two have problems, and you'll probably want to replace them once you've played for a while. No real major complaints about the actual People of the Lantern monsters, though, especially the Goldsmoke Knight, who is the showdown's amazing, but also I think the Watcher's no slouch. The problems I have with it only came along after a while. I just want to quickly highlight this is one of them. I'm not sure this weapon needed this extra specific against the Watcher. Devastating 2 is a lot. But anyway, that's that. Now we're going to go through the rest of these. All of these expansions, and then I'll briefly touch on the Gambler's Chest and the Black Knight, even though they're not on the simulator. But first of all, I'm going to pause the recording and I'm going to stretch my legs and have a drink. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Node 1 monster that I first ever played against, the Gorm. So, the Gorm. This is the monster that drew me to playing Kingdom Death in the first place. And it's still one of my favourite monsters. It has an incredibly well done, unsettling, like, hybridization of different elements of not just human and elephant, but also this anglerfish like lure, the big like dark subaquatic, like down in the abyss kind of eyes that are so large to draw as much light in as possible, and that vacant sort of lower jaw missing. This is the first monster I actually got. It's the first one that arrived in my house. It arrived by itself. This is the reason I play Kingdom Death, along with my love of Warhammer Quest and Super Dungeon Explorer. The first time I encountered the Twilight Knight was the Super Dungeon Explorer chibi version. But yeah, this is it. This is the monster. Now, the Gorm is a Node 1 monster that can be fought alongside or in replacement of the White Lion. And it does a really good job in both cases. The Gorm is more complex than the White Lion, for sure, and actually more dangerous. Flatten is the first AI card the Gorm ever did against me. I was playing with friends, and I died immediately. So my first ever showdown, I got sat on by a baby elephant anglerfish bile factory, and spent the rest of the time watching and playing with everyone else, but not actually having a survivor to control, because she was very dead. Also, out of all of the monsters in the game, the Gorm is the one that does the best job of making each level feel like an older version of a new evolution. The level 1 feels very young, very energetic. You get to the level 2 and it is like an elephant in heat, and it is constantly vomiting up bile. And once you get to the level 3, the Gorm is absolutely ancient, and it's in a boneyard where it's come to spend its last days and probably die. It's one of the few monsters where we get to see the complete life cycle, and that feels so engaging and such a draw. And I am hopeful that we get something similar with the Frog Dog, where we get to see more of this cycle, because we've seen little bits of the Frog Dog cycle, and it's very interesting as well. The showdown, as I said, it's more dangerous than the White Lion. It's definitely designed for players who have gotten very comfortable with fighting the White Lion, and offers a different way to play. It feels like a mammoth hunt. It has some tricky things to navigate, but they make sense, and you learn about them. You go, okay, well, I should fight like this and this and this. And on the whole, the only complaint I have in regards to showdown is that Hiccup needs to be changed. Hiccup is one of the AI cards I mentioned that I think needs to be fixed. The reason is, basically, once the Gorm starts hiccuping, it's going to do nothing but keep hiccuping until it's hit. Thematically, chef's kiss, yeah? Makes sense? Little baby, hiccups, pat it on the back, solve them. The problem is that it targets. Because it targets, that means that the monster controller bonus of +1 insanity comes into play, and you can actually just have it target all the survivors one after another in turn, boom, boom, boom. They all get as much insanity as you want, and then you can do crazy things with that insanity. That's just genuinely an exploit. I don't do it these days. I've done it for like testing purposes, and it distorts the game. It's not fun for me, but it's also just clearly not intended. So I would like to see this pick target being removed, and it just goes roll for each adjacent survivor, perform retch, boom, boom, boom. Just get rid of the targeting part, and this card is fine. Outside of that, though, zero complaints. Hit locations, very, very interesting and cool. There's some like unique items you can get through crits. The Death Blow has its own unique, strange resource. Amazing. That's all fantastic. So I think it's one of the best showdowns in the game, and I really like how it changes the feel of the showdown as it levels up. When we get to the settlement side of things, I actually think for the most part, it's full of tons of positives. One of the few rough spots is Gormant armor. So Gormant armor's on paper really interesting. It is a 4-slot armor set. The body piece covers body and waist at the same time. That's super sweet. And it has this shield based kind of mechanic. Clearly it wants to be a set about taking and soaking damage. Even down to the point when you look at the set bonus here, and it allows you to ignore laser sphere injuries. It's also one of the few armor sets that's upgradable because you can get this level 3 only item that adds to the armor set and gives you an even better upgraded version with a better part of the ability. Thing is, it just turns out you don't want to be taking severe injuries really. It's very difficult to manage severe injuries because of death being a part of them, and that is a massive problem. So you end up having to build in anti-death. On top of that, you're trying to cover the shield, and you really want to activate the Gormant Mask because it's one of the best headpiece abilities in the entire game. It's incredibly strong. So Gormant armor, it should be like, oh, it's a 4-slot armor set, but it's not. It just ends up being around 7, even sometimes 8 armor slots to try, 8 gear slots to try and get it all working right, and that sucks. So ultimately, Gormant armor just kind of has a really nice idea, but doesn't really do what you want it to. I tend these days to actually either use it as a off-tank armor set with very good shield, or I will use it for archers, because archers like to have less slots in their gear grid, because they then get to put more arrows in, which is, arrows are one of the best parts of archery on top of range. But for the rest of the stuff on the settlement side, amazing. You get 2 settlement locations. The first one, the Gorm, which, amazing name again. Anna Poots designed the Gorm, and Anna Poots' naming stuff is just so good. Right? So good. Gorm Gormery, yeah, no notes. Basically, you have a table that you roll on. You roll 2d10, and then you'll roll more d10 depending on how many Gorm innovations you've got. Like they're all parts of alchemy, so they're the 4 stages of alchemy. And the more dice you roll, the more powerful the potions get. They're really good. The Wisdom Potion is a super nice variant on hit location control that synergizes with slow weapons, which is really cool, and it's passive rather than being activated. It's very powerful. Then there's a Steadfast Potion, which helps scale up block and it's really good and useful for shield mastery. It combines well with the Knuckle Shield and Gormant armor to almost create a working build. But not every potion is like that. In particular, the Life Potion, which allows you to ignore the first death you suffer in a showdown. That one, it really needs some affinities. Any situational gear card should have good affinities on it. For example, the Feather Mantle in the Phoenix, that's an example of a well done situational gear card. Doesn't always work. If you don't have any collisions, it's doing nothing, but it's always contributing. Still, that's minor complaints. The rest of it's incredible. Once you get your alchemy up high enough, then you'll also get into generate Gormite, which is a special form of iron that has other applications. Just really good, very engaging and fun part of the settlement that's different to normal stuff. On the rest of the gear front, well, the weapons are almost universally amazing. Right Mace, best in class. Rib Blade is a one-handed grand weapon that is possibly too good. This strength might be a little bit too high. Knuckle Shield, amazing shield to get very early on. Totally shuts down the Screaming Antelope once you have it. That's fun. Greater Gax, superb axe, well balanced, well statted, doing everything I want from an axe. Very cool. I love as well the naming. This is a Greater Gorm axe, and then there's a Gax. We have Acid Tooth Daggers, love those. We have the Black Sword, one of the best swords in the game that rewards you for the journey of becoming a Swordmaster. Has an unfortunate interaction with Vagabond Armor, but we're not worrying about that. That's not the fault of the Black Sword. We also have the Gorm, which at the moment is our only non-noisy instrument, and I love it. And if anything happens to this, I'm going to be really sad. So I know I'm going to be sad when it gets updated to have noisy. But yeah, really fun situational item that gives you instrument synergies, which is super cool. Pulse Lantern, a great example of a powerful once per showdown ability. This is a wonderful finisher, but it doesn't work all the time. You can't 100% rely on it. Honestly, all of the gear outside of the armor, just interesting and enjoyable. This is an incredibly good expansion, and typically this should be the first one you get once you've played the core game a bit, because it synergizes well with the Screaming Antelope and the White Lion, so it sits in nicely there. But it can also replace the White Lion quite well because it's got good weapons and a alternative for the Cat Eye Circlet, so all of that fits together really well. It also plays incredibly well with our next expansion, and this is the Node 2 monster Spidicules. Spidicules' showdown might be one of my favourite in the entire game. The way it plays out is Spidicules, aka the mothership, darts around the board trying to keep her distance while deploying her little spiderlings as her tools of dealing damage. So the spiderlings, this is our first minion type of monster. We don't have many, but we have a couple of minion types. Spiderlings are fairly straightforward. They're like trash mobs in like a boss battle or an MMO fight or whatever. They are simplistic in how they behave, but the way they behave can change from round to round, because you can have stuff. Spidicules has a lot of moods, and it'll have one of these moods in play at a time, and they will change how the spiderling happens. So here we've got 8 angry legs, a reference to 12 angry men, which I do like, and it just makes the spiderlings more dangerous, but it like just indirect damage. This will vary immensely, so it's a bunch of different things. On top of that, Spidicules has this really cool mechanic where you cut the legs off it, and if it becomes limbless, you get to roll the legless ball all the way back to the settlement, where it becomes an innovation and gives you access to some upgraded pieces of gear, while also providing you with more silk generation. Very thematic, difficult to do. It's like hard to do it against the level 1. The level 1 has so few hit points. If we look here, it's got 9 plus the final hit. So you need to wound like 8 locations of legs exactly in order to be able to cut them all off and then beat Spidicules. That's a tall order, so it tends to be the level 2 or level 3. That's all really sweet. So one of my favourite showdowns. No complaints about it. It doesn't have any flaws in my opinion. It scales really well. It's always interesting. There's terrain interactions you've got to think about. It's fantastic. On the gear front though, Spidicules is in a bit of a rough spot. First of all, we have silk armor. Now actually, silk armor in isolation, in a vacuum, really good. It's an amazing little tank armor set. It has some variable layouts you can put it in. It even has some pieces of gear that you can activate to get more armor points. And with its set ability of rearranging the hit location, this should be a premium piece of tanking armor. The trouble is that the headpiece, the silk turban, you have to get a strange resource from the level 3 Spidicules to craft it. The time you can do that doesn't matter, because you're moving on away from silk armor. You definitely don't want your tank on silk armor once you're killing level 3 Spidicules. That's, it's a bit of a waste. That's a shame. I hope it's addressed and changed, because everything else about the armor set I like. It's a challenging armor set to do the layouts on, because it's not, you can't get everything. You've got to compromise, and that's sweet and interesting. And I like the aesthetic of it, this bone silk kind of Persian sort of feel. Very cool, very cool. So I like all of that. I just want I want to be able to craft silk armor around the time I can craft leather armor, and then it would directly compete with leather armor, which gives me an additional step of like, do I make leather armor, do I make silk armor, which one am I doing? That's interesting. As for the rest of the gear, mixed bag. Its weapons Some of them, like the hooded scrap guitar and the amber poleaxe, they really unfortunately just directly compete with White Lion gear. Especially the hooded scrap guitar, which has the same problem that the Beast Knuckle has, in that you may as well just have the Lion Beast guitar because it has deadly. But this has really good paired design, so in campaigns with no White Lion, that's really, really cool. I greatly enjoy playing the guitars here if I've set up a good mix for a solid guitar progression. The amber poleaxe, King Spear is better, but if you don't have the King Spear, this is a solid starting spear. The axe bit on it, not quite so important. You tend to have better axes. There's also the amber edge, which is a scimitar, really cool. Doesn't have a weapon type. Stuff without a weapon type is hard to justify, but this does do work. This does absolutely do work, although I would like to see it a little bit stronger, and I'd like to see a scimitar mastery in campaigns of death. Our Silk Whip, best whip for the early game, unfortunately just straight up replaces the point of getting the Hunter Whip though, which is a little bit of a shame, but that's the fault of the Hunter Whip. It's not quite good enough. The Silk Whip's archiving moods, this is amazing. This whip I will use a lot. If I get access to it, I'll tend to have it on Support Survivor, because this is a fantastic ability and really enjoyable to use. The real issue here are these items, not Hooded Scrap Guitar, but these 4 items over here. So, Silk Bodysuit, you can make this super early on, and it is really, really powerful. Essentially, you stick it on leather armor, and leather armor becomes a set that is so good you don't need to worry about making anything better for your tank. It doesn't have any special requirements. Just gather the resources by fighting Spidicules, and off you go. This is the item I think that should be locked behind level 3 Spidicules. It's very strong, and that would be the best place for it. So that's my general house rule recommendation I've always made is take the strange resource cost off the silk turban, put it on the silk bodysuit, way more balanced. Harder to balance though are these 3 rings. Well, 2 of them. Blue ring, we're cool, got no problems with you. This is a really interesting ring. It's difficult to make, as all of the rings are. They are difficult to make, but it's also it's AI control that's different to Rawhide Headband, and it's the point where I feel AI control like this makes sense. It works really well, and it prevents a lot of damage by improving things. It's a great tank ring. It's just kind of overshadowed by the green ring, which the first time you're attacked each round, you gain 3 to all hit locations if you're the monster controller. That means once every 4 turns, you gain 15 armor points. The very few monsters can burn through that many armor points. So I think the amount of armor points this gives this a little too high. It gets really, really absurd when you combine it with the Gloom Hammer that does monster controller manipulation. But it's not completely egregious. The red ring, on the other hand, is. The red ring is that worst category of item, or gear card in general, in that if you try and use it honestly, it's rubbish. It does like unicorn wounds, ignoring hit location, just automatic wounds. But you have to get bleeding tokens when you're the monster controller. So that, if you're going to play honestly, requires the monster to hit you and bleed you when that's going on. But that's not how this is played. Instead, you just play things that deliberately bleed yourself, and you just bleed the monster to death. And that's where the problem is. I really would like to see the red ring changed in some fashion. Thematics are super cool. I do like the thematical concept of this, but it turns out giving survivors way to wound the monster without bothering about the hit location deck is so powerful that you need to be very careful when using it. Even limited to once per round, that would not fix the problem with this ring. There is a build known as the Red Ring of Death. I talk about it in the Spidicules gear video. Essentially, it kills almost every monster in the game without any trouble, perfectly safely. And that is not really where things should be. So, on the whole, Spidicules' showdown's amazing. Spidicules' gear a little bit more wonky, but there are some interesting parts to it. for sure, and I like what Silk's doing. I also really like the Silk Surgeon secret fighting art. This is quite hard to get. You need to fight the level 3 Spidiculus. It needs to do a specific move that will remove one of your survivors from the board for the rest of the showdown, and then you need to win the showdown. But Silk Surgeons have a unique build style where they use, look, see, they rank this up through a system in the book. I talk about it in the Spidiculus gear video. And then when you're rewarded for playing silk and jewelry, amber jewelry, which is really sweet, and you get this nice, cool, bring them back from the dead ability along with like actual healing. Silk Surgeon is one of the most delightful secret fighting arts I've ever played with, and I think is a huge positive. So Spidiculus is for players who want to step up on their Node 2 monsters. It is the hardest Node 2 monster we have right now, including the Smog Singers from the Gambler's Chest. It's really great showdown. Obviously arachnophobia trigger warning, so maybe not for everyone, but I really like everything that's going on the showdown front. And the gear, if you play with it right and you're honest with it and fair with it, it's okay. If you run a few house rules, it's really good. Spidiculus is close to being one of the highest recommendations. If the issues get fixed in Campaigns of Death, it's going to be an easy yes, yes, yes. Right, Flower Knight. So Flower Knight is one of the most beautiful miniatures in the entire game. Everything thematically about the Flower Knight I love. I love that it's like the Abyssal Woods version of the Gold Smoke Knight, but you can see it's doing a lot better. It even has themes of the Abyssal Woods tied into it, but it's also this gorgeous female knight. And like, yeah, it's worth noting this is one of the few models along with Spidiculus that I will often refer to in the feminine form, because, well, not only do we have this beautifully elegant outfit, which anyone could wear. You too can look fabulous. It doesn't matter what gender you are. You know, you do you. Dress up as a Flower Knight, please. I want to see more Flower Knight cosplay. But it has a bustle, and also it has Athena's owl aspect to it. As a little aside, and I wanted to talk about this, owls, but despite being considered wise, are dumb as rocks. I worked for my work experience at a bird sanctuary, and it was drummed into me that like eagles reasonably smart, not as smart as crows, but you had to be careful with owls because they were as stupid as heck. They are really dumb because so much of their brain space is taken up with big eyes so they can see in the dark. Beautiful, incredibly elegant, totally silent birds, but idiots, angry, nasty idiots. So that's just an aside I wanted to talk about, as you know, we haven't yet had a proper owl monster in the game. We've had a sculpt of one, which looks really cool, and I hope it's dumb. I really do. But this is our first sort of owl-like appearance. The trouble is, that's kind of where the praise for the Flower Knight ends, because it's not entirely true. I do have some praise for the level 3, but this monster has the lowest toughness in the game. Outside of prologue monsters, it's tied with Perry the prologue White Lion. But also, it has a specific vulnerability to critical wounds, which is a part of this whole fencing parry mechanic where it's constantly fencing you to teach you to be better at fencing itself. Thematically, again, really cool, really interesting. But mechanically, when you start getting into it, it turns out that you can take 4 naked survivors with just their fists against the Flower Knight and punch the level 1 to death. And it generates a lot of very beneficial resources that can be turned into legitimate normal basic resources if you want, or they can become population, or they can even be traded to get very powerful normal fighting arts and a few very good pieces of gear. It's a shame. Now, fortunately, when you get to the level 3, admittedly at 11 toughness, you'll tend to fight this a bit earlier than most Node 2 level 3s. But it is quite a challenging monster on that front, and it's because of its statuses and various bits and pieces, and the toughness is high enough that it sort of comes together quite well. So for me, I only put the Flower Knight in if I'm just going to fight it at level 3. And that's also the rewards I want to get is from the level 3. Showdown mechanical thematic wise, I really like this set routes where it sort of has this area that it's driven these swords into the ground and created a little ring, like a fighting ring to go in, but also a fairy ring that it protects. However, it's just the numbers. I wanted to highlight these cards. You can see how 0 base damage. Yeah, and so this means the level 1 is just a lot of time doing very little that's absolutely relevant at all. On the gear front, not a great situation either. There are a couple of super interesting items. The Sleeping Virus flower is powerful, interesting, exciting, has a bunch of different applications, very strong. You can get 1 from introduction of the Flower Knight. You can get more from beating the level 3 Flower Knight. This is also used in making green armor. No complaints really. These, though, on the other hand, a bit of a mixed bag. Flower Knight badge, really good. Extra evasion, tactics cards, great. The satchel. Satchel's amazing on one particular build, down here, talk about it in a moment. Otherwise, it's supposed to allow you to take flowers with you to fuel the Vespertine foil. But it just doesn't work out. The Vespertine foil is not, it's the only weapon, it's in fact the only gear card with this continuous upkeep, and it's every single settlement phase, which it's okay if you're playing the People of the Bloom variant campaign, talk about that in a moment, because you can just get access to flowers every single year. What the Vespertine foil does elsewhere is it forces you to just hunt the Flower Knight every other or every 2 or 3 years and have satchels on everyone else. Vespertine cello is really good, but it's an instrument, it's noisy, so meh, why use it? Vespertine bow used to be obscenely overpowered. It's now been tuned to the point where I think it is correctly balanced. It is a deadly shooting bow, and it also gives you access to the Acanthus Doctor secret fighting art through the events. That all works out really well. So I think Vespertine bow is actually in a good place now. It's not bad. In the People of the Bloom campaign, I really like this. It has these 2 variant pieces of gear. The replica flower sword, oof, a lot of fun to play with. Weapon melee grand sword. Got this that you can't dodge and deals all this and scales it to the late game. It even has synergy because People of the Bloom survivors have more green and less red affinities than normal. All super sweet. I like this variant campaign. I wish the Flower Knight helm had more relevance for armor sets or had its own armor set. I think this is a space we'll see expanded in Campaigns of Death or just in the Abyssal Woods, so it's a nice bonus. It's not a disappointment that it exists, and it's an interesting way to play. Then we have these 2 secret fighting arts. Love them both. Acanthus Doctor allows you to take up to 3 satchel gear cards, and you get a ton of armor points if you have lots of green affinities. Acanthus Doctors are really powerful frontline tank / bruisers. They're very strong. They can even use fresh Acanthus or flowers for healing. They're super thematic. Now that the Vespertine bow isn't totally bonkers, they feel a bit more balanced. They're very strong, but you're not just going to be endlessly making them and fielding absurdly powerful bows. So I think it's in a good spot these days. It's still a very strong class, and I'm going to talk about it in the tanking video. True Blade is one of my top 5 secret fighting arts in the entire game. So you have to have Ghostly Beauty and Narcissistic, which means essentially you'll not wear any armor on the head, and all swords in your gear grid gain deadly regardless, and you get extra luck when attacking with the swords. I love this. I love the thematics of this. I want this artwork as a model. She seems really cool. I like how she's contemplating the weapon. She could put a bit more clothes on in the miniature version, but you know, that's fine. Nothing's really on display. Anyway, get back to True Blade. I almost always want it. That's the reason I put the Flower Knight into the campaign, is to get True Blade, because I think it's fantastic. Ultimately, who's the Flower Knight for? Newer players who want to make the game a bit easier. Flower Knight definitely does that. It gives you access to a way of gaining population through resources, by flowers. It gives you a lot of powerful fighting arts, and a lot of just generic power you can use in other things. The Acanthus Doctor, get one of those, that can solve your tanking issues for a long time. Very good on that front. For more experienced players, I think you're just going for this for the sword interactions, or maybe to play People of the Bloom, and that's kind of it. I don't think this is a super high priority purchase, but definitely it will make your campaign easier if that's what you're looking for. Okay, White GigglesLion. Going to be brief with this one. It's a variant on the White Line. It provides a vignette showdown, so a one-shot you can play with friends. I think one-shot's okay. The Killenium Butcher one-shot is better, so that it would be a high recommendation. With respect to how it changes the White Lion, the level 2 and level 3 versions get replaced with the White GigglesLion. It has an updated version of the cunning trait with Vicious, where it constantly does its grab move regardless of whether you dash or not, so it can still be a bit more threatening in that way, and it targets all adjacent survivors. It also has this extra punishment on collisions, which is pretty decent, and it has a lot of mechanics that revolve around this gigantic pendulous paunch, which is a new hit location that it uses as a form of punishment against the survivors. If you really enjoy the White Lion but you wish it was a bit more challenging and you want a reason to fight at level 3, this is it. This is the version. It's a better version of the White Lion. I think it does a good job of making the White Lion more challenging. So it's a decent pickup and purchase for somebody who's just looking to improve their White Lion experience a bit. On the gear front, does a couple of really significant things. Deathbone arrows I think are a bit too good still, even now, but it's nice to have access to arrows, and they can help the catgut bow scale for longer. The Oxidized Beast guitar, it's only People of the Lantern only, but suddenly we've got an endgame guitar. That matters a lot. That really makes a difference. So I genuinely think these are fantastic, and for people who want to play a lot of People of the Lantern, this is great. The Lion Slayer cape, this actually helps not just White Lion armor, but also very significantly Screaming armor, and this is great for Screaming armor. This actually gets Screaming armor to the state I want it in, so I think the Lion Slayer cape is good. It's actually maybe a little bit too good because it reduces all damage, not just damage from hits. And finally we have the Hooked Claw knife. This is what I was referencing when I talked about the Cat Fang knife a lot earlier. This is a dagger that is worth it. This is what you should expect to get from beating a level 3 Node 1 monster. I think it is really well designed, and it is one of my favourite daggers in the game, and a prime reason why I have the White GigglesLion in my campaigns. So this is great for players who are just looking to tweak their White Lion experience a bit more up, or experienced players, or people who are looking for a introductory way to bring people into the campaign. Although I do think the Killenium Butcher is a better choice overall these days. That's not on the simulator yet though. Okay, Dragon King, big boy, one of my favourite monsters in the entire game because of his human form. The Dragon King is a Node 3 monster. It is an epic showdown that feels like you are fighting a nuclear-powered behemoth. You feel every weight of the punch and every blast from its nuclear-powered chest sphincter. It's just incredible. This is such a great showdown. It weakens itself, and then once it gets to a certain degree of weakness, it opens fire with this meltdown ability that and it's constantly pouring radiation out everywhere. It has cool sweet moves like this where it just hits a big old space, and like this is just hitting damage. Like you can dash out of this, which is really cool, but it's big wow moments. The showdown is one of my favorites. I really have no notes because it is so good. Everything about it is incredible. I'm just going to push on to talking about the settlement side of things. Dragon armor, I really like dragon armor. It's competitive with Phoenix armor, but it's more damage orientated. It's one of the great two-handed weapon armor sets because of how leap works when combined with reach weapons. It looks really cool. There's a nice like homage of the Dragon King. I think it's fantastic. The rest of the gear though, there's a fair bit struggling. The biggest problem is all of these weapons have about half the strength they should do. Right, maybe the blast sword should be about strength 6, but especially these nuclear weapons, for some reason all of the strength of all of the weapons in the Dragon King seems to have been made with the idea that you're always going to be leaping with them, which isn't a good way to design a piece of gear, so they all end up a little bit too low, which especially is egregious for the nuclear weapons, because most of the time a survivor dies when you're trying to get the resources to craft one of these, and they have a very unimpressive, like this edge ignites ability. I mean, why is this dealing brain damage? Why is this cost an action? I can get way better just off the Zanbato. So the thematics of these nuclear weapons is very cool, but the end result needs more. The other sweet part of these weapons is this core concepts, which are 2 cores. This one you'll get by beating level 2, this one by beating level 3, and they will give the weapons either sharp or extra deadly. The deadly is obviously better, locked behind a higher level monster, so that's fair enough. That's sweet, but you tend to struggle a little bit because slots are at a premium, and committing, I think like putting one of these on the gear grid to get a specific bonus is quite good, although the power grid is way better because deadly 2 is really, really good. I wish they had like maybe a core affinity of their own, or even the weapons had slots you would put them into instead of putting them in your gear grid. Either way, still really like the thematics of these, but the weapons need more strength, which is why this expansion synergizes really well with the Sunstalker, because the Sunstalker armor can provide that strength. Special note: shielded quiver, incredibly powerful, lets you use arrows twice. That makes a big difference, especially with the hollow point arrow. Crippling a monster's movement can really impact its ability to hurt you, because if it can't get to you, it can't hurt you. So, on the whole, as a quarry, who's a Dragon King for? Everyone. It and the Sunstalker, they're my solid recommendations. They are really good, really enjoyable, and on top of that, they even come with campaigns. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here. I will do a video on People of the Stars separately and People of the Sun, but I just wanted to highlight that this is one of my favourite Nemesis monsters in the entire game. Close to the Butcher overall. I like it more than the Butcher. Dragon Jesus is a sweetheart, and it's one of my favourite characters, and the campaign is just incredibly good. I have one criticism which applies to both People of the Stars and People of the Sun, which is the toughness of the final monsters too low. My recommendation to you is to push their toughness to 30. That makes the final showdown feel epic again, the way that it works with the God Hand and the way it works with the Gold Smoke Knight. That's really all I do, but I know we're going to get updates to these in Campaigns of Death, so I'm excited to see what the team does to make those last showdowns really epic. Okay, Sunstalker showdown, incredible, love it, really good showdown, really good. It has this whole mechanic with the sundial where it casts shadows behind survivors and obstacle terrain, and it builds up in intensity before exploding and burning anyone who's in the light. It's also actually a minion monster, but it doesn't really deploy them until level 2. This monster is fast. It has an ebb and flow to it where it's at its weakest just when it's at its most dangerous. You're trying to kill it just as it's about to supernova, because the track removes wounds from it that it will return once it supernovas. We'll talk about it in a showdown video in the future. It's just really good, and the level 1 you'll fight and you go, this is pretty easy, why do people rave about this? And then you're playing against the level 2 and you're like, oh boy, okay, so the level 1 was just kind of kid gloves, just letting us get used to how the light and dark mechanics work, because oh boy, this thing is going full ham. On the gear front, this is some of the best gear selection in the entire game. Cycloscale armor is amazing because of this prismatic ability where it lets you have all color affinities, so you can do weird wacky builds that normally you wouldn't be able to manage because you just can't get the affinities together. Also, the cycloscale sleeves in combination with shadow walking, an ability on the set, gives you sharp in the blind spot. So there's a bunch of weapons that normally you couldn't use that suddenly become really good. Cycloscale armor is an amazing armor set. I really love what it's doing. I think it's incredibly engaging to play with, and it's one of the great like mid-game damage focused armor sets, probably the best. And it's also got this like assassin feel to it, although it looks like beachwear, which is kind of fun. So massive recommendations there. On the gear front, there isn't a single bad piece of gear in this entire selection. These are doing a wide range of different things. I'm not going to go into them in detail because I'll be talking about everything again, and I've talked about it all in the Sunstalker gear video, so check that out. All I can really say here is I love how you're asked to make difficult choices. You could craft this or you could craft that, but really you can't craft both unless you're going to go out of your way to hunt a lot of the same level, and so you're constantly being asked difficult questions, but the gear you unlock as a consequence is amazing. Who's the Sunstalker for? Everyone. Not only does it have an amazing showdown, but it has a great campaign in People of the Sun that feels very different, that plays differently. You're mostly locked out from using heavy armor, which is really interesting. The unique survivors, the savior replacements in this campaign, are super powerful in a really unique, fun and interesting way. And also, the Dragon King is a great quarry for People of the Sun. Likewise, the Sunstalker is a great quarry for People of the Stars. And the both of them together in People of the Lantern as quarries, they synergize incredibly well. So these are expensive, but they're absolutely worth it. They're worth the price. They're adding so much game content. And no matter how you might feel about the Sunstalker model, you should learn to embrace the little chubby, because it is such a good expansion. This is probably the best first generation expansion, and then maybe Dung, Beetle, Knight, Gorm, or Dragon King, or Slender Man. They're the ones I'd put in the other slots. Okay, Lion God. Lion God is amazing thematically. It is a past ruler of whatever the White Lion's kingdom was, or the kingdom the White Lions came from. It is an incredibly dangerous Node 4 monster. Overall, the most dangerous of the first generation expansion monsters. Whew, like really dangerous. It's also kind of unfair in a couple of the things it's doing. So briefly, to go on to the cool stuff, it has incredible stats. Look, 14 toughness at level 1. It has this neat mechanic where it hefts scenery and hits you with it and leaves this hole in the ground that you can go explore for finding bits of gear, and a little bit more about the kingdom that it's abandoned. This whiplash is super sweet, where you get bleeding if you hit it anywhere other than the blind spots. All of that amazing, and I really like this relentless mechanic. Relentless, it basically keeps like triggering and drawing more AI cards in a semi-unpredictable fashion. It's super engaging to play against and really scary. This trait was originally on the Dung Beetle Knight. It was moved to the Lion God, which fixed the Dung Beetle Knight's problems and has made the Lion God a great challenge. Unfortunately, the rewards are not very good. It doesn't have its own specific resource deck. It has nothing really to craft, and Earthquake is one of the worst designed cards in the entire game that essentially just reads, unless you're in a very specific situation with a certain amount of movement, your survivor is dead, and that isn't fun. Just you die is not fun or engaging, so this is the third of the 3 AI cards that I want to see changed or removed from the game. On the gear front, the best gear tends to come from fighting the level 1. Necromancer's Eye is a super version of the Cat Eye Circlet. The Ancient Lion Claws are fun in that how they again improve White Lion armor further offensively, and that's pretty good. You can get those by splunking against the level 1. And these Mahindis, some of them are really enjoyable and quite good. The level 2 and 3 versions, you get Golden Plate at level 2, you get the Lion God statue level 3. I talk more about this in the Lion God video, but on the whole, they're underwhelming for what you get, though some of the Mahindis are quite good. Butcher's Blood might be one of the most broken items in the entire game. I will talk about that in the damage dealing video though, so damage roll, damage archetype video. So we'll get there, but this is nuts. This is such a crazy ability. The other big thing, exciting thing, is that you can get this secret fighting art, the Necromancer. It's a really cool symbol-based alternative, like survivor class. It has its own special wounding thing. I think it's really, really good. I love it. But overall, I don't think the Lion God is particularly great. It's something for experienced players to have a go at if you want to really challenge yourself. That's fine. But the rewards are awful compared to the risk that you go through, and this feels like a rushed expansion. It really feels like this was pushed out at the last possible minute, and it was just like, oh, good enough, we'll send it out there. It's going to have some revisions. It's got a whole expansion in the Silver City coming for it. I do think if you're getting this as part of a bundle, great, no problem, but I wouldn't be buying this separately. I just don't. I don't really rate it particularly overall yet. It needs more work. It definitely has a lot of potential, but it is the worst of the Node 4 monsters, and it doesn't really hold a candle to the King or the Dung Beetle Knight at all. Okay, so speaking of Dung Beetle Knight, Node 4 monster, one of the best monsters in the game. This showdown is incredibly fun, always difficult and challenging, and it makes me really happy. It's a mixture of Power Rangers and basketball, and just fighting a honest to goodness Dung Beetle that wants to play and pretend to be a knight. It looks good. This is one of the really great first generation sculpts, even though it's not very dynamic. The detail on it's amazing, and I love its design a huge amount. In the showdown, the really cool part of this is if the dung ball is near it, it'll deal a ton of damage to anyone who's nearby. So you're constantly needing to keep the ball and the Dung Beetle Knight separated. But when it is separated, the Dung Beetle Knight will try and get back to the ball and reunite with it. So that's constant push and pull, literally push that ball, and that's really sweet. On top of that, it has this nice carapace mechanic where there's these unwoundable locations that when you do wound them, you archive them out of the deck. Also, they have an extra little bit that works with the level 3 Dung Beetle Knight. I'm not going to spoil it here, I'll talk about it in a Dung Beetle Knight showdown video, but let's just say be aware that the level 3 Dung Beetle Knight is terrifying and super powerful. On the settlement side, we've got so much that's great. We've got a whole underground harvesting type mechanic. We've got gear that we can stick in the ground and wait a few years, and when it comes back out it's been upgraded because it's been calcified. That even works on Zambatos from the core game, which is super sweet. The armor set is one of my favorite armor sets. It doesn't have any locations, and it's not really armor keyword, so it's something you can combine with other armor sets to make them better, or you can wear it and then carry, like, say, a rawhide headband and still have good armor, so that lets you take the rawhide headband for a lot longer. It also calcifies and becomes even stronger, and it's thematic as heck. You get knocked down and you roll along with your plates, rolling armor. I think that's all super sweet. I have no notes about rolling armor. I think it's amazing. I love how it looks. I love how it plays. And it's the same with the gear. I don't think there's any bad gear at all. All of this gear is really good. The regenerating blade can regrow limbs or become a juggernaut blade if calcified. Amazing. The errant badge is very strong, giving you extra armor and tactics. The sentry shoulder pads you'll see splashed into so many tank builds because you've got ripple pattern for extra defense plus extra armor. Digging claws is one of my favorite tank weapons. Perfect on a Qatar specialist because they never have to worry about reactions. Trash Crown is one of my favourite hit location manipulation things. The Hidden Crimson Jewel is amazing, and I really like to hope it's a reference to King Crimson from JoJo's because it seems to do that ability. All of this is just sweet as heck. Also, only good bomb in the entire game right here. Ultimately, who's the Dung Beetle Knight for? Players with a bit of experience. This is no slouch. This is a dangerous monster. It gets more dangerous and increasingly dangerous like crazy at level 3. But hey, everybody should own a Dung Beetle Knight if you're playing like at all regularly as a lifestyle type thing. and this is in the top 5 first generation expansions for me, for sure. Onto the Nemesis monsters. We've got 4 more to go. These should be a bit quicker because for the most part they don't have too much in the way of gear, and also I've been talking for a long time and I need to wrap up before my voice goes and my partner needs to come back home soon. So, Manhunter. This is a Node 1 Nemesis monster, so it's a possible alternative for the Butcher. It feels similar to the Butcher in many ways, and the only reason I don't rate it at the absolute top is that the Butcher is amazing, but the Manhunter is really very, very good. It is a combination of a cowboy, a wrestler, a slaver, and this also thing from the Holy Lands. It's a little insight into one of the neighbours of the Plane of Stone Faces, and how detestable they are. This is a really good fight. Instead of having a extra basic action, they will tombstone instead, which is a very scary, high damaging but low speed attack. But it does hit like all adjacent threats, and it's a tombstone. It's the Undertaker. Also has a gun, as you can see, really cool. We'll fire the gun occasionally. All on top of that, we have, as the Manhunter levels up, they use more and more traps, and they'll have these extra hit location cards in their deck as like surprises, like mini trap cards. They don't cancel the attack, but they will do bad things to the survivor, which is really cool as it shows more experienced Manhunters becoming more and more dangerous. And hey, these Manhunters go to level 4, which is unusual and very cool as well. On the gear front, I've talked about this in the gear video. All of these pieces of gear are super interesting and can be used in fascinating ways, with maybe Hunter's Heart being the weakest of the bunch. I really like everything about this. If you're looking to increase your Nemesis options, or if you want something a bit different to the Butcher, this is recommended. This is a very good expansion. I really like it. It has great synergy with the Sunstalker, with the Dung Beetle Knight, and a bunch of other things. It's just a very, very good Nemesis monster. Thoroughly recommend. Lion Knight. Lion Knight is also from the Holy Lands. As one of 3 Lion Knights. This is the second one. The first one was very broken and doesn't work right. The second one is kind of broken and isn't doing his job and is wandering around with these 3 immortal scribes. And he's basically putting on plays in various different places. The showdown has survivors take the roles in a play where the Lion Knight is the lead. So the whole goal is kind of flipped around. If you win the showdown and defeat the Lion Knight, you will be punished. But if the Lion Knight wins, then you kind of get rewarded, and the Lion Knight wins by killing the villain. See, boom there. Except for the third version, when all bets are off and you just need to win. But that's wrapping up the Lion Knight story. I like that thematically. It's really strong. There's a little bit of wonkiness in that there's a hole in the AI that can be exploited. I'm not going to talk about it here. Leave it for the showdown video. But that's about it, because otherwise all the thematics on this is really, really cool. You just need to be aware that if you win, you are going to get punished, so that might feel bad. On the settlement side of things, this is one of the Nemesis monsters with a ton. It has a whole strange caravan turn up. They do a bunch of different things, and the biggest, most impactful thing they do is they give you access to these 3 hybrid armor sets. These are all amazing. I love Warlord armor. It's an incredible tanking set for the late game. It uses axes for that job. Axes are great when you get round to critting with them. It's superb. Dance armor, amazingly mobile, fun armor set for a damage dealer. Also quite good for an archer. Very, very strong. Brawler armor actually makes use of 2 pieces of gear that normally are not particularly commonly used. I really like that. I think it's the weakest of the 3 sets, but it's mostly because affinities on it are not great, and this melee focus isn't super strong. But I like that you get knocked down, you gain strength tokens, you get back up. It's got that kind of boxer brawler sort of feel to it. You knock me down, I'm coming back twice as hard. That's fun. So hybrid armor sets are amazing, and the way they recontextualize and reuse older armor pieces is such a great concept. I think the Lion Knight is not a super high Nemesis monster purchase. On sale, absolutely recommend it. It's not that it's bad, it's just the Manhunter and the Slender Man are absolutely better. This is totally a great replacement for the Kingsman though, because it's a Node 2 monster. I'd take this over the Kingsman any day, because it's got all of the thematics of the Kingsman, but much better mechanics. Slender Man, another Node 2 monster. Slender Man, if you can get over the internet creepypasta of the status of this thing, is amazing. It is really difficult to fight, incredibly challenging, and it turns things on its head in that it makes your survivors feel isolated. It pulls them off and drags them to another dimension where they need to be rescued. It has all those themes of abduction, and it inflicts insanity on your survivors rather than draining them, and then it will eventually punish them if they're too insane. This pod imprisonment mechanic, which I show here, really cool. You get trapped in the dark place, which is really bad for you, and of course there's less survivors on the board. They can reach in and try and rescue you though. It's super cool. We can see here with Long Arm Grasp, this is a little example of how cool the monster can be. Look, it's got reach 5, very hard to kite, and that concept of its long gangly arms getting longer and longer, very scary, very cool, very thematic. Clarity of Darkness is worth highlighting. This is another secret fighting art that creates a build. This one can be exploited. It can be used as part of the Red Ring build, where effectively the monster can't ever attack you. It can also be used to make a super support, where the support never has to worry about the monster. That's my preferred use for it. It's maybe a little bit too powerful, because it's meant to be that you get stronger and then you attack and then your power fades away, but you can just sit there with the untargetability that it produces via all of this. I'm not going to go into it any further here. Again, check out the Slender Man video on the gear front. There's a lot of really good, interesting gear that uses resources from the core 3 monsters of the White Lion, the Screaming Antelope, and the Phoenix. So just like the Lion Knight, this is giving more interactions with the core game quarries. That's super cool. These are some of the highlights here. Some very unique stuff like Gloom Cream, which actually gives you minus hunt XP, so you can keep hunting for longer. Really useful if you have, if you're getting close to the retirement but you haven't completed your weapon mastery. This can help. It's quite balanced in how it works. It's very thematic as well. I like it. You rub the cream on yourself and you forget and you lose understanding. Slender Ovule, really good supporting item to help damage dealers. Absolutely fantastic. The Gloom Mehendi is very interesting, and it's unfortunately not got the symbol keyword for the Necromancer. Hope that gets fixed. Has this extra crystal skin interaction, which is cool. Gloomhammer is one of the best clubs in the game, obscenely good, maybe too good, but it is a lot of work to make. On the whole, Slender Man is definitely something everyone should think about picking up. Be aware it's a tough, dangerous monster, and it plays a bit differently, so it might be rough, but the Kingsman is a tough, dangerous monster, so it's a flat and fair replacement for it. It gets weaker if you're playing campaigns where you're not hunting the core trio of 3 quarry monsters, so be aware of that. So I think this is like an intermediate monster, and then very good for very experienced players, but you're going to have to be thoughtful with what your quarry mix is and how you're going to hunt them. Alright, last actual monster, the Lonely Tree. This also can just be the Nightmare Tree terrain, so that's a cute little extra bit of use for it. This, first of all, this starts off as a terrain card, and it can potentially make the monster more dangerous. You tend to spend your time trying to keep the monster away from the fruit that is in play, the Nightmare Fruit. Yeah. Once you've done that, you've successfully won. Then if there's any Nightmare Fruit left, you'll gain access to a Lonely Fruit resource, which can allow you to start the showdown against the Lonely Tree. There's other ways you can encounter this. Object of Desire is a hunt event that will let you run into it. The Lonely Tree is a super unique showdown where you fight against a static opponent in the middle of the board, and that does not make it easy. It's really quite a fun, challenging fight, and the extra interesting part is as you go against it, it'll have different rewards in these fruits that allow you to have different abilities given to survivors. You can even create a saviour with this one, which comes from the level 3. And you can fight this monster multiple times if you happen to get the right... if you happen to encounter a lot of the Lonely Tree as a resource, as a terrain. The showdown is incredible when it uses these nightmare fruit as like weaponry and throws them around at you, but also it hits you with its boughs, it shreds you with razor leaves, it attacks you with roots through the ground. It is what I've said this a few times, but it's a really good showdown. It's one of my favourite showdowns. I have the Lonely Tree in every campaign. It doesn't turn up all the time. It's kind of hard to run into. You may not meet it at all, and in which case it's just a nightmare tree that you're using for the whole campaign, which, you know, that's not great. My recommendation is always pick this up when it's on sale in the Black Friday sale. That's a good price for it. Normal retail price isn't quite good enough. That might change when we see what Campaigns of Death is doing. Okay. So, Green Knight Armour. Green Knight Armour is a little bit like the Lion God in as it feels a little rushed, and it's getting a bigger, more expansive update in the Campaigns of Death. What it is not so much a campaign or anything like that right now, but it is a journey to construct this incredibly powerful and gorgeous armour set. I've written a full guide on the Patreon about how to make this armour set, and I'll likely do a video version of it at some time a bit further down the line. But the short version is you don't bother getting this unless you've already bought all of the expansions that are involved in it, and they are the Gorm, the Spidicules, the Flower Knight, the Dung Beetle Knight, the Manhunter, and the Lion Knight. It's quite a lot of expansions needed. And you will combine. You need to have all of them in the campaign, even Spidicules, although Spidicules basically supplies just one innovation, which is a little bit of a shame that Spidicules is required. Oh well, Spidicules is a good enough expansion. It was fine enough. And this is kind of the challenge is making it. Once you've made it, you're gonna dunk most of the monsters in the game. Suddenly, you've just got the main character with their powerful armor set and absurdly strong weapons. Griswoldo and the cheese dinosaur, Fetosaurus. We call it the cheese dinosaur shield. It's not an expensive expansion, so if you've got the rest, it's not too pricey. This is more, though, I think you're picking it up if you're speculating on getting Campaigns of Death. Although the truth is, I think Campaigns of Death will probably end up being a necessity for all of these expansions. Definitely now that I'm playing with the Gambler's Chest, it feels... I notice that these original expansions feel a bit lacking without patterns and knowledges and other bits and pieces. So that's stuff to look forward to. Right, I said I'd talk briefly about the Gambler's Chest. Gambler's Chest is the best expansion for Kingdom Death. It's also the most expensive. I would say it is definitely for people who are looking for a more complicated experience. It has a ton of extra systems that step up the amount of bookkeeping and the amount of things that you need to keep your head around. If you're familiar with role-playing games, if you're used to complicated board games, you'll probably swim just fine, but be aware, way more complicated. It's also, the survivors are considerably more powerful, and the game's kind of a little bit easier because of that. You have so much extra power, there's so many more opportunities for doing powerful things. So you may reach a point where you're like, oh, the monsters aren't feeling particularly challenging right now. Well, you know, you can always play differently, or you can push the envelope even further and go against tougher and tougher stuff. Yeah. That, though, might sound like a negative. I don't think it is. I think that the Gambler's Chest is just incredible. The Crimson Crocodile is the best of the Node 1 monsters by a mile. I really like the Smog Singer's gear, but they have some issues mostly based around noisiness, but also the showdown is thematic as heck, but they're not particularly dangerous. So just be aware of that. Spidicules is still the best showdown, but I think maybe the best gear is from the Smog Singers right now. I love the Smog Singer armor set in particular. Very, very, very good armor set. You get upgrades for the Phoenix, which is nice, and you get extra patterns, and you get this scout system as well. That's, I think, one of the weaker parts of the game. It just kind of doesn't work as they originally pitched it, which is a shame. Then you have the People of the Dreamkeeper campaign. Incredible. Best campaign. Even better than People of the Stars, as much as I love People of the Stars. People of the Dreamkeeper. It hurts me to say it, but it is a better campaign. The King is amazing and basically an auto-include in all of my campaigns these days. Just yes, please. It's really good. The gear is incredible, although maybe the gear's a bit too strong for some of the final Nemesis monsters at the moment. But still, power fantasies. We worked hard to get there. We deserve the payoff, you know. That's kind of it. The big system being philosophy and patterns. The negative I have is that for some reason the Phoenix gets its patterns and it gets its knowledge cards and it gets its scout cards in this box, but the Screaming Antelope and the White Lion only get their knowledge and scout cards. Not including their pattern cards in the Gambler's Chest is a issue and a oversight that I want to highlight as not being great. It means it's very hard for me to just say, you want to improve everything in the core game, just buy the Gambler's Chest. I can't, because it's going to be, do you want to get a load of extra monsters and improve the Phoenix? Buy the Gambler's Chest. Do you want to make the Screaming Antelope and the White Lion better? Then buy Campaigns of Death instead. And I don't know if that's going to improve the Phoenix. So it's awkward. What's done is done. We can't change that, but it's kind of made the pathway a little muggy on that front. Still, the Gambler's Chest is the biggest investment. It's also worth it. It's really good, and I'm having a great time exploring all its content. That is why the earlier stuff feels a little bit less incredible alongside it. But that's not a fault of the original stuff, that's just praise for how the design team have improved in the years since they made the first stuff. You know, great job, guys. Speaking of great job, Black Knight. That's the latest release to come along. It's a Node 3 monster. It can replace the hand. It should replace the hand in every single one of your campaigns. It is evocative. It has a beautiful story. It is thematic as heck. It's really fun. It's an engaging fight. It has a mini campaign that tells a super cool story that leads into enticing you about what's going on the inverted mountain. It's a lights out, amazing release. It is expensive, but I think it's absolutely worth it. The Black Knight's a gorgeous model. All the other models you get are great. The new armor sets, just fantastic. It even has the game's first ever 2-card gear card, where it is two gear cards in one. Not going to spoil anything more about that, but just think about how cool that is. So it's a huge recommendation from me to anyone who wants to replace the hand. Seriously think about getting the Black Knight, and also you get that campaign, that little mini campaign you can play with your friends. It's a little complicated, so you might want to get them used to other stuff before jumping into playing it, but I think it's pretty good, although be aware there's a big difficulty spike in the second showdown. You might have to try that one a few times, but yeah, ultimately really good. So if you want a good Node 1 monster, get the Gorm or get the Gambler's Chest. If you want a really good Node 2 monster, I think Spidicules is still the best of the bunch, but you may want to house rule a few things. On Node 3, I genuinely think you should always get the Dragon King and the Sunstalker. Absolutely. Node 4, get the King, Gambler's Chest, get the Dung Beetle Knight. Yes. Don't worry about the Lion God. Okay, and then on the Nemesis front, I think with the Node 1 Nemesis monsters that Manhunter is pretty good, but Butcher's so strong that you might just not need to replace it. I think that the Slender Man is a really good Node 2. but the Lion Knight's quite acceptable, and Atlas from the Gambler's Chest is also fairly decent. But Atlas is a bit easier and softer than the others, so just be aware of that. It's a big model, but the showdown's a little softer and easier. It helps the population. And Node 3, just Black Knight all the way. If you want to make your campaign a bit easier, Flower Knight, definitely. And I'd say having more expansions overall just makes it a bit easier. If you're fed up and bored with the White Lion, I do think the GigglesLion adds a bit more, and you can even go as far as saying, I'm not going to hunt the White Lion at level 1. That could make quite a difference. So that's sort of, where I stand with it. The Lonely Tree, I think you should only pick up on sale. The Green Armor you should get if you've got all of the expansions already. It doesn't cost too much extra. It's nice to have, for sure. The expansions I think that you can leave for the moment are the ones that are due to have big expansion updates, which is the Flower Knight and the Lion God. Flower Knight, as already mentioned, I think it is worth picking up if you want to make the game more accessible for newer players, or if you really want these secret fighting arts, or you plan to just fight it at level 3. That's pretty reasonable. Lion God, I genuinely think should kind of just be left on the shelf for the moment. It definitely needs some big support. Yeah, okay. I've lost count of where we are in time, but that is it. That is this video talking about all of the monsters and the expansions, and just a stream of thoughts about them. I think every single one of them has positives. There are weaknesses to every single one of them as well. Some have a lot less, but overall I have a great appreciation for everything that's happened here, and going back through all of these has made me appreciate even more how much Team Death have grown in the time in between, and the stuff they've done in the Gambler's Chest is incredible. I don't ever want to go back from Ark Survivors. That's a big reason I don't do KDM Simulator videos, is because I'm waiting for Ark Survivors, because I've had my sweet hit of that, and I don't want to go back. So anyway, my name's been Fen. As always, if you want to support these videos, you can do so by joining the channel membership or on the Patreon at the 50 krona, $5, €5 tier. All of that's greatly appreciated. This has been a long video. I'm going to record more long videos if I get more support. But otherwise, next time I'll be back with the first dedicated archetype video about my second favourite class, tanks. And until then, I wish you the most happy hunting.